So, I mean, it really comes down to, in the old school days, people would just say, hey, invoke a new CFC, and then they'd get a CFC, they'd use it, and then it would disappear. And over time, we started making more and more complicated CFCs, right? And that's where things get trickier. And they always go back to the composition thing, like, hey, if you want a car CFC, you need an engine, you need tires, the engine needs spark plugs. And so if you start to do some crazy object-oriented code.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm here with Gavin Pickin, the world expert on ColdFusion and author of, he's shaking his head. Are you not the world expert?
Not the world expert.
One of the many experts in the world.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing a Monty Python sketch here now. But that would be the Spanish Inquisition for those of you who didn't get that reference. But we're not going to put people under the Spanish Inquisition. We're going to be talking about the state of the ColdFusion user survey and all the insights and cool tools and things you may have missed out on. Gavin has done some extensive analysis of the results. And we also have a lot of cool graphs you can find on the TerraTech website. We'll put the link to the results in the show notes, which you can find on our podcast page. And we also will talk about a certain conference that's coming up. And those of you on video probably can guess the name of it, but it has the initials ITB. We'll reveal what those mean later if you don't know what it means already. Welcome, Gavin.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And for those of you who don't know, Gavin is the co-host of the Modernize or Die podcast, which is all about modern ColdFusion. And he has been a software consultant for decades, more decades, actually. I think 2.5 decades, I want to say, if the math, no, 2 and 3.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Enough. Yeah, plenty.
Enough. And he originally comes from New Zealand, but now he's in California, beautiful sunny state. And although he's called Gavin, he's not related to the governor of California. So don't worry about that.
Yep. Some people take offense.
Well, some people are fanatic fans of Gavin Newsom and other people don't like him. And very few people haven't heard of him. Anyway, we're going to be talking about ColdFusion, not politics today, unless it's politics of ColdFusion. So maybe we should start out. It's possible some people listening have never even heard of this state of the ColdFusion Union survey. So what is that, Gavin?
Well, obviously, you should know a lot about it since you guys started it. And it sounds like it's been going forever that I've known. But I think you guys said it started in 2007 at the CFUnited conference. So basically, it's a survey to try and ask ColdFusion developers about, what are they using? What are they working with? Are they working with, what servers, what JavaScript frameworks, what ColdFusion frameworks? Why do they like ColdFusion? There's all these different questions. And we're just trying to get a sort of a roadmap of what the ColdFusion community is using, doing, where it's going. And it's kind of cool to sort of see all that because, for lots of different reasons, different people want to understand the ColdFusion community. Those who want to build tools like Order Solutions builds a lot of tools for the community. But just in general, as a community, we want to know sort of what people are using and pick up on those trends. And so the survey, you guys do it every year and it's great because, it looks like we're getting more and more respondents every year, and we're hoping that, if you haven't taken the survey, that you'll take it, but also you'll tell all your developer friends that never get out and never are on the forums and not on Twitter and don't know about it, because the more people who answer, the better results we get.
Absolutely. And thank you for telling people about the survey on your podcast. And I think you or Brad would have mentioned it in social media, as of course have I. I will mention some other reasons people love this survey. Managers like to see, what technology is out there, who's using what version of ColdFusion, how many people have upgraded. Some people like to see what problems people have had with ColdFusion or why they love ColdFusion. There's also a comment section where people say a variety of things, and we'll have a look at some of the things they said. And it's all anonymous, so hopefully everyone feels pretty okay sharing their info. And CF developers often tell me that they take the survey and it mentions tools for ColdFusion that would make their life easier. That they didn't even know existed until they took the survey, and they're like, there are tools for that. So it's also a nice way to keep up to date with what's available. Because I know when you've got your heads down programming, you don't always, you sometimes miss those announcements from Foundio or Ortis or Adobe or whatever. So
yeah, for sure.
Those are some of the reasons.
Yeah, that's the reason we built that CFML news podcast, because I couldn't keep up with all the stuff. So now if I run the news podcast, it's my job to go figure out what's new so I can tell everybody else. So I keep up.
What a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And just like you said, not only does Ortis and Foundio and Integral and all the other third-party vendors, but also the two major manufacturers, if that's the right word, of CFML engines, Adobe and the Lucee Foundation or Association or whatever their name is, LAS, I think it is, right? Both of them study the results of this to see what's going on in ColdFusion. So, they get to hear your voice as a ColdFusion developer by you filling out this survey and seeing what the trends are. So all good reasons for that. And from my own personal point of view, here at TerraTech, we have a mission to make ColdFusion more alive, and people being aware of and using more tools and best practices, and new, upgrading the version of Adobe ColdFusion or Lucee, to me is part of that. And also for me to, see people's feedback. What problems are they having at, quotes, the coal face of ColdFusion development, where they get their hands dirty? What's that like for people? And obviously I talk to dozens of people every month, but when you get all the people filling out the survey, it's a much bigger way to hear what's going on. So
it's definitely a big plus to have all the results, and like you say, we can do some number crunching on it and everything, and it's really interesting to see, because you only get a taste, and again, the survey is only as good as the number of people who fill it out. So we always recommend, when you fill it out, tell everybody else make sure other people are filling it out, because it all adds up. So
yeah, and I want to say thanks to Ortis and Adobe and Integral, and I think Foundio all gave prizes for a raffle to get more people to fill out the survey this year, which was a great innovation. So thanks, Gavin and everyone else who contributed to that. Luis, who's head honcho or general de Ortis Solutions. And so, and it also, we do listen to, if people have suggestions on how to phrase the questions better, or how to, are the questions we should get rid of because they're not useful, or are the new questions that would be helpful to add, or new options to questions, we always have that. And many of the questions have a write-in area where you can say, well, there's this tool you didn't even list in your survey, and we do analyze that. Brad and I have done that every year, where we look through and try and figure out, hey, for example, are there editors that very few people use and it's just cluttering up the survey to leave them in there? Let's take them out. Or are there new ones people have told us about that need to be added in for next year? So always looking to improve it.
Yep.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TERATECH.com. And now back to today's show.
Looking to improve it.
Yep.
Cool. So maybe what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you and the people watching and listening, I'm going to go ahead and share the survey results on the video. But don't worry, those who are listening, we will talk you through as though you're listening to a baseball game on the radio, if you ever do that. So you know what the heck we is talking about.
For sure.
So survey starts off with what version of ColdFusion do you use? And here's the cute graph of it showing, well, maybe you should tell us about it, Gavin, because you're the guest.
Yeah.
You've
so
analyzed it.
The funny thing is that originally when you first wrote your review several months ago now, Adobe CF 2018 was the most popular version of the engines out of all the different Adobe ones and Lucee ones. But now this graph is updated over time, and now Lucee 5.3 or later actually has pipped them all. So
wow.
Overall, we have 195 respondents out of the 836 respondents, and people can choose multiple versions of these engines. So let's get that clear right away. They might use Lucee for some, and they might use Adobe, maybe CF, 2016 for others. But overall, Lucee is 23.3% of people are using Lucee 5.3 or later, and ColdFusion 2018 is at 21.2. So it's not far off. It's pretty close. But so far, for a single use, a single engine, Lucee 5.3 or greater is the most popular one there. But overall, most people using this, filling out the survey, we have 537 of the 836 respondents using an Adobe engine. So, that shows, a big percentage there. So we're still seeing a lot more people using Adobe. So it's 64%, so about 36% are using Lucee, and most of the Lucee people were upgrading to 5.3. So 75% of the Lucee people are using the latest 5.3 or, one of the 5.3 minors, because 5.3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. But they're in that batch. So that's kind of cool to see, don't you think?
I think it is cool to see greater adoption of Lucee, and we'll probably come back at the end of the year and Gavin had this really clever idea to do like a retrospective of all the surveys and see the trends over years. So we're going to make some graphs of that for people curious on that. But I've seen Lucee grow in size on uses. The other thing I'll point out, as Gavin mentioned, people use on this question, they can fill out multiple responses, and there's plenty of people, for example, using Adobe 2016 and Adobe ColdFusion 2018 or 2021 at the same time. Maybe they have a production box using the old one and they've fired up a development server with the newer version, and they're in the middle of a migration. And then the other trends I notice here, as you mentioned, most people in Lucee get to the latest version. They don't mess around with old versions. So I have bumped into a few people who do that for God knows what reason. And no, it's inertia and tech debt. I understand the reason. But with Adobe, there's a much slower upgrade, whatever you want to call it, like pace, velocity. And partly that involves money. And from people I've talked to, although Adobe spend thousands of hours making everything backward compatible and back testing against prior version code, they have a whole library of code that customers have lent them under NDA that they can back test stuff on. And it's not all pretty code. They have some pretty, people voluntarily gave them ugly code to make sure the engine still runs ugly code correctly. Even though Adobe do that, people seem to be kind of resistant to upgrading. Whereas in the Lucee world, that's not true.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, Lucee also has that one button click upgrade and revert, which I think is a big deal. Upgrades for ColdFusion, a lot of times if you do the upgrade, even just a patch upgrade, sometimes it'll blow away your bond code configuration. IIS doesn't know how to find ColdFusion anymore, and people have had a lot of struggles with that. But I think the big thing is licensing, like you said. And then the other big thing is, they're scared about upgrades, but they have 40,000 regression tests apparently in the Adobe test bank that they run when they do this. And like you said, right now, Adobe CF 2018 is at 33%. So 33% of the people that are Adobe users are using CF 2018. 28% is CF 2021, which is pretty good. It's almost there. So they're almost half the people that are using Adobe ColdFusion 2018. Like they're pretty similar numbers. But then 2016, there's still 17.5% using that.
And that's it. I just want to point out 2016, as far as I recall, went end of life earlier this year, I think. No, am I wrong?
We're looking at CF 2023. Like they're teasing previews at the end of the year. And so far right now, we're basically right at 60% of people are using a supported ColdFusion licensed product.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure all these ones here are unsupported for security fixes. Forget new features. Obviously, they don't get new features in older versions, but they're not getting the hot fixes. And what's with this CF9? I mean, what year was CF9, guys? I want to say it was 2009.
I think in 2011 it went end of life. So it's been out of life for 11 years. So even if you had the crazy Adobe support packages, they ran out years ago because you can get an extra 3 to 5 years. But so right now 40% of ColdFusion boxes in your server environment are basically not licensed, not updated, not patched, and that's kind of crazy and scary. So 4% are using CF9 or earlier. And then CF10 is 4.8%, and CF11 is 12.2%. And see, that's where I think those trends will be nice because I know like CF11 a few years ago, there was a lot of people using CF11 still. 2016 and 2018 they came out. It was like 2016 now, like 20%. So I'm curious, how much has that gone down over time, or has it stayed about the same? Because those people will never upgrade. It might just be
it's not they'll never upgrade. They need to have a motivation, I think, and. I talk to CIOs all the time, and often the motivation is they've had a security probe thing run, and it's pointed out this thing's end of life, and they're at risk of getting hacked, basically. And that's often the motivation that happens. Other times, a new person comes in at the top IT job, and they're like, "We can't have all this technical debt. We need to get this upgraded." So, I'm sure you guys see that too with a lot of folks. So anyway, I just want to encourage everyone to just to misquote that, American Uncle Sam guy saying your country needs you poster that told people to go fight for America. Your ColdFusion needs you to upgrade to the latest version. I understand when Lucee 6 comes out later this year, obviously you might want to wait a bit until there's a dot release, right? And they fixed anything that came out. And same with Adobe ColdFusion, we didn't update people to 2021 until there was a hot fix, and then we've started rolling it out. But there is absolutely no excuse for not keeping your software up to date. And we don't have a question about versions of SQL Server or Windows underneath, but I come across people who are running Windows Server 2009. Guys, that went end of life a while back. It's a liability. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. I think we should honorably mention Blue Dragon as officially dead at this point.
0 people responded that they still use Blue Dragon. It was being pretty low for a while, but there were a few. It was one of the other open source engines back in the day with Raylo and stuff. And
it did good stuff at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And the guys behind Blue Dragon, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but they helped us with getting CFUnited off the ground together with CF Dynamics guys. Because we used to have this CFund conference, and they said you need to make it more professional and charge more money, so you can have better quality event. So I do want to thank them for that. But as far as a language to use, no great reason to use it unless you're heavily wedded to .NET or something.
Yeah. So apparently, just for end of life discussions, so CF11 end of life in April of 2019. So it's been over 3 years. 2016 end of life February 2021. So that's been out of life for 16 months at the time of recording. And then 2018 is only good for less than a year. It's July of 23. It's end of life or end of core support. So that's core support. You can get the extended versions. A lot of people using Adobe do have those big government contracts or enterprisey contracts with extra support. But so it's just good to know that, you've only got a year left. So if you're on 2016, you're going to go to 2018 or even 2021. The support,
or possibly 2023 by the time they actually do it. Sorry, I shouldn't be mean to the people listening. I'm sure they all have excellent reasons why they haven't upgraded. And I will say something else for people thinking of upgrading. The development and staging licenses for all Adobe ColdFusion is free, right? You don't have to pay for a staging license. If you want to play around with this, you can install it on a staging server or a development server without paying Adobe any dollars. Yep, and you can test out your code, see it, fix any issues, check it goes through QA, okay? And then you can tell your boss to write the check for the license for the production version.
Yep. And so back to Lucee real quick, we'll see that Lucee, like we said, 75% are running the latest Lucee 5.3, and there are a lot of different branches in that. Lucee 5.3 has been around a long time, but 5.2, 5.1 is 20%. So there's still a lot of people that haven't jumped to 5.3. And then they're almost, I think 5.3.10 right now is almost sort of at the end there as well. And then Lucee 4, there's about 5% on Lucee 4 earlier, and then Raylo 4. Yeah. So it was still at almost 1%. So it's good to see that they're upgrading. But yeah, Lucee's path usually is a lot better. They have bugs, things pop up, but they're usually pretty good about fixing them. And the Lucee 5.3.8 and 5.3.9 has been pretty stable, and 5.3.10 is about to come out, I believe. And then they're working hard on Lucee 6. So
I think the Adobe ColdFusion development team in Bangalore, India, do a great job of fixing things too, but it's slightly less transparent and it's a little less under your control. Whereas with Lucee, the whole thing is totally transparent. You can do a pull request on stuff. You can fix it yourself if it's super important. You can pay, you can get a sponsorship or what, I forget what they call it, but you can pay money to the Lucee Station Switch and say, move this bug I reported to the top of your bug list and fix it now. Right? What do they call that? They have a name for it.
The hot fixes, you mean, or
no? Where you pay money to them and they actually fix the bug in Lucee now instead of in 6 months' time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the sponsored support. I mean, I don't remember the exact name they have for it, but they basically they get the hot fix out and they get it to you, and then you can test it, and then they'll roll it out into an update right away as well. And Adobe does that for the support customers too. I know that was a big thing where they've been waiting for updates for a while for that. They released some updates May 10th, but people are running all these hot fixes on top of things. And so that's one thing I think that both the engines can do better is get those fixes out faster. Security updates is one thing with version changes, but get those little fixes out. Hot fixes are great, but they got to roll them out and get a release out so people can start using them. So
indeed. So let me find, I'm just going to stop the share for a moment so people can see us on the big screen. And let's see what would make sense. Do we care about enterprise versus standard? Do we want to yap about that a bit, or are we?
Yeah, it looks like it's a 60-40 split, I think, roughly. Okay. So like 60% of people are using enterprise. That's a decent number. I mean, more and more are going towards the enterprise over standard. I mean, obviously, there's a pretty big price difference between them. But
4-1. On the other hand, you do get more cores and some extra features.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it looks like basically 55-45. So it's been about the same for a while. I think it's just the enterprise is slowly creeping up. So that's a good sign for Adobe, and they are releasing more of those features. And to use Command Box, you have to be on an enterprise license. We've been trying to get them to allow standard because of the wire deploy.
Yes, but Adobe people listening to this podcast, please let people run Command Box against Adobe ColdFusion standard.
Yep, and then I know that a lot of their discussions this year have all been about licensing and, does enterprise, what does it cover? How many Docker instances? Is it per core, per instance, so there's been a lot of debate about licenses and how they cover it. And, I think people will be more comfortable using Adobe once they're more certain about the licenses, because that's the thing is a lot of people moving to Docker. We'll talk about that later. And, Docker with Lucee is easy because you don't have to worry about the licensing, but Docker with Adobe, you have to consider the licensing. And, if you're going to scale up or down, like, do you have to pre-order licenses, how much is it going to cover? So, but I think enterprise, you have to have enterprise, I believe, for the Docker stuff. And so maybe that's why that number is going to creep up.
Not sure that's 100% true, but it would be pointless because you're only allowed 2 cores with standard. So it's kind of like any reasonable Docker cluster setup is going to have way more than 2 cores floating around anyway.
You would think, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, and also there's the a question I've never heard answered. Maybe it has been answered, which is, where do you count the cores? Are you counting them in the Docker virtual instance, or are you counting them in the underlying hardware underneath?
That's the thing. It's like, is it what's allowed to run or what's actually running? So that's where it gets a little fuzzy. We're waiting.
I don't want to go down the licensing rabbit hole because I had a really heated discussion with Mark from Adobe, which I hope he's forgiven me for at this point. And I also we did a panel with a bunch of ColdFusion experts where we talked about licensing and looked at all the issues. And also I shared a vision for where I see what I think ColdFusion, how it should be licensed with more transparency and fair and easy to understand terms, like charged by the hour or by the minute or whatever the CPU unit is, and other things. So I think there is a vision forward. I have sympathy for the engineers at Adobe who don't totally control this because there's a whole legal department who gets involved as well. And I think there is a brighter future for this, and I'm sure it will happen eventually.
Yep, I think it'll be really good for ColdFusion in general when that happens. Like I said, I'm
absolutely
not pointing fingers, and I just hope that it gets to a point where it's just more clear. And I know, like, I understand it's complicated, and a lot of things are, they're locked down and they can't report home, and so people, there's a lot of complications to this stuff. Don't get me wrong, I understand. I just hopefully they can figure it out so people feel more comfortable, and that'll help.
Also, there is a better version of ColdFusion on AWS. There's a metered version there that you can get.
Yeah, you can use the AMIs. Yep.
Right. So anyway, let us move off that contentious topic and look at what people are running underneath ColdFusion. So Windows, Linux, Mac.
Yeah, this is, again, one of those interesting ones, right? So for the longest time, it's been a very, very Windows-controlled setup. And it looks like that way is continuing, probably because of the enterprise and big business. Windows has always been a little stronger. And so they're at 58%. And 32% for Linux is, what I'd probably expect. And then Mac. Now, it doesn't say if this is your production server or not, right? So this could just be some local development. So we're about 10% for Mac for your server OS. So I'm kind of curious how many people are running production servers
things on Mac. Yeah, I think a handful do because they're Mac aficionados.
Yep.
But you may be right. A lot of this may be development servers or whatever. And I think, a lot of enterprises are Windows shop, not Windows shops, they're Microsoft shops. And they, if Microsoft makes it, they love it. So I think that explains a lot of the Windows. And of course, many people, do not only do the ColdFusion programming, but they do their own DevOps, and they have to do the patching and installation, and they're more comfortable with a Windows server than Linux. So, though it must be said, modern Linux is pretty straightforward to use.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot better than it used to be, for sure. There's a lot of different variations out there now. There's like a million different options. So,
yes, and I think also, to be fair, maybe I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is underlying the current version of Windows and Mac, really the kernel is more or less Linux anyway. So it's not like they're that technically different.
Yeah, it's a lot of the time it comes down to the file sensitivity, like case sensitivity and everything. And now I think a lot more people are probably going to use Windows with the fact that the Windows Linux subsystem is so good. That's really made a huge difference to people that they needed to have that Linux subsystem. And that's people went Mac because it wasn't quite Linux. You had a little bit more user friendliness and everything. And that probably leads nicely into our next one on your development PC or laptop. what are you using? And those numbers are a little bit different than the server numbers. So,
yes,
again,
let's have a look at those, because that does differ things. So let me just reshare that. So, and for folks coming to the TerraTech website for this, we split this up into 8 pages so the pages run quicker, but you can get a PDF of the whole thing if you want it. But we're going to look here at what you're using on your laptop and browsers and databases, which I think are all key development questions.
Yeah, and so on that one, actually, Mac takes a big jump up because it goes from 10% on the server to almost 28% if you're on the actual, your laptop. And Linux goes down from 32% down to like 10.5%. So a lot more people are using Linux on servers. They're probably using Nginx and Apache. They're running possibly on Docker or just Ubuntu servers. It's just way more common to run Linux in production than Mac. But Windows, it only goes up from 58% to 61%. So, that stays about the same. But basically, all those Mac users probably on their laptops, they're probably just deploying to a Linux-based system because that's what they're used to. And it's kind of interesting that the 2 others that show up on your list there are Pop! OS and Linux on Vagrant. And so those
and
are
Chrome OS.
Well. Oh yeah, there's Chrome OS too, but it's 2 users out of like 515, so it's not even half a percent. So, but it's kind of cool that you can run some of this stuff, and some of the editors we'll talk about later. You can run them on a Chrome OS now. Like VS Code actually runs in the browser. You can actually do it in the browser. So it's pretty slick.
It's very slick, particularly if you're working at some incredibly mega lockdown server where you can't install any software without getting 7 forms filled out in triplicate and have a paw print from your dog on the form as well, So
sure.
Let's look at browsers, because
that's a big one.
It is a big one. What browsers get targeted? There's been browser wars over the past 2.5 decades or 3 decades. When did browsers get invented? 1995?
Yeah, in the
almost
90s.
Yeah, mid-90s, Netscape came out. Netscape doesn't appear on this list anywhere except Firefox is the grandson of Netscape, I guess. Sort of, maybe. But most popular browser is what? Chrome. Yes.
It's
followed
kind of
by
though.
the Fox.
Yeah, Firefox, but Edge is right up there. So that is actually pretty surprising that Edge has jumped up so much. It's at almost the same percent. I'm going to get these percentages worked out for us as we keep chatting. But it's 307 versus 344. So that's pretty good numbers. I mean, IE's dropped off quite a bit too for those who are watching.
Well, IE has been outlawed by Microsoft. Didn't they say we're not going to issue any releases and you can't download it anymore? And if you use it, you'll be put in the corner and told to write out 100 times, I will use Edge. Yeah,
pretty much.
I'm exaggerating, but they did have an announcement 2 or 3 months ago saying IE is no more.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good thing. I mean, I know everyone's so happy they don't have to support IE 11 anymore, and Edge is a Chromium browser, so there's a lot more comparability. A lot more things in it are more like the other modern browsers. So I know it's a huge relief. But again, looking at percentages is what people have to do to see if they still support it. And most companies are looking at their stats, like how many people are actually using this browser. And some people are still having a scary amount of people still using it. And it's probably because there's a bunch of OSs out there that just haven't been updated. If you're running Windows 7 or 8 or, like the old ones, because IE is still at 4.6% here is what they're they're using. So
there are some people who, they, like you say, they have they're using an old version of Windows and it's got IE. Other people did use special features that IE has, and they told all their users you must use IE. I've seen that.
I mean, this question is which browsers and client platforms do you support? So it doesn't mean they're using them, but they're supporting them. So I mean, only 5% are supporting IE. So that's not bad. But Edge support's getting more ticks. So this one here, I mean, Chrome was 35% of people are checking it, but again, you can click multiple things. So a lot of people are probably clicking a lot of them.
Oh yeah, I mean, often we'll support Chrome and Firefox and Edge, and sometimes we throw Safari in there too, because that's another popular one on the Apple side of things.
Yep.
I do want to give a shout out for the Brave browser because it's It's basically Chromium, but without all the privacy invasion BS that Google Corporation pulls. and Firefox, for that matter, these days. They're not the world's best privacy browser anymore, unfortunately. Yep. So we don't have a section for search engines, and we probably never will, but maybe I'll ask that in the ColdFusion developer Facebook group. What search engines do people use? Because I think that's been shifting over time too, but that's a bit of a tangent. But I was reading about 2 new search engines coming out. One was called Yep, and one was some crypto-based search engine that looked cool. So I think I'll write about those elsewhere, and I'll dig them up for you, Gavin, and maybe I'll stick them in the show notes. And then there's a bunch of other ones mentioned. Let's move on to databases, because you can't have a ColdFusion app without a database unless you're incredibly clever how you write it, or it's a really bizarre application.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
What's the most popular databases in this year?
Well, it looks like it's the same one we've had the last few years. SQL Server is out ahead. It's like 271 of the respondents are picking SQL Server versus 221 for MySQL, which is the big 2 front runners there. I mean, we've got a lot of other honorable mentions, and we'll give you the percentages here as well. But
MariaDB is basically a flavor of MySQL, but more for clustery typey things. I think it's a fork, right?
Yep, it's a fork. Original.
And then Oracle. What's this Oracle database?
I don't know
who makes that. I don't know how that slipped into this survey. No, it's the original. It's the original RDBMS that Larry Ellison's company, Oracle, churned out many moons ago. I worked on Oracle version 2 databases sometime in the 80s. Or maybe it was Oracle version 1. I don't know. I forget. It was really ancient. But it did do a relational database. So
yeah, it's very different. That's the way I'll put it.
Yes.
I've used it before, and it's just, very different.
Well, some people have it, and let's face it, ColdFusion is great at gluing together various, enterprise apps, and they may have Oracle floating around in the mix somewhere. So,
Yep. And so SQL Server, like I said, leads the pack with about 30%. MySQL's there at 24%, and then the next big ones, MariaDB is at 9.2 with 84 people using it, and then Oracle's actually 4th, which is interesting. They're ahead of Postgres just pipped them. Postgres has 74 at like 8.1%, and then Oracle is 5th at 7.7%. But it's pretty close there. But yeah, MySQL and SQL Server are the big ones. And again, you said Microsoft Shops, right? Microsoft Shops are all about
use SQL Server, yeah. And at the lower end of apps, SQL Server Enterprise SQL Server Express is free if it's less than a 10 gig database and various other conditions they have. Yeah. So for smaller apps, it's great.
Yep. And now that their Linux support, like you can run SQL Server and you can run all that stuff in Docker through Linux, and there's a lot of cool options there. So it's doing good. It's still holding strong, and those are the 2 big ones.
And then also on Azure, they have a cloud version of SQL Server where you don't even have to maintain it. It's just like a platform as a service, or what do they call it? I don't know. They have a name for it. Database as a service.
Yep. Right? And you can actually do, straight SQL Server like that, or you can actually get their modified version of it. I think that's the Aurora one, which we only have 1.5% people using Aurora, but a lot of people using SQL Server. They they treat it like SQL Server because it's basically the same. Now, a lot of them are modified versions for that scalability, but a lot of services like DigitalOcean and everything, they have a lot of these tools, Postgres and MySQL, MariaDB. You can run them as basically databases as a service, and they're pretty slick. Take away all those headaches.
Slick. So. I love DigitalOcean. They're like a quarter of the price of AWS, and they have
a quarter of the complexity.
Yeah, exactly. Now they don't, if you've got to do OCR or voice recognition or some other AI clever thing, no, they don't have it. But if you just want to run a ColdFusion site in a database, it's great.
Yep, for sure.
Inside droplets using your containers from Docker. I don't quite know what the stats is here, but I want to say 25-ish% are open source solutions here, maybe more, maybe 30. MySQL, MariaDB, I think MongoDB is open source. Couchbase, I want to say, though, Postgres.
Yeah, a lot of them have community editions, even if they are commercial. So, like, I know Couchbase has, some premium editions, but they have the community edition. That's probably what SQL Server is doing with that smaller size. Same with Redis. There's the normal open source version. There's the commercial version with more cores and more threading and everything else. So it's a lot of them are doing that. That's smart. That they're trying to get people in. And I think that whole taste test, give them a try, and then once you get bigger, better, and your app is doing better, then you're more willing to pay a little bit of money to upgrade if you need to scale. And I think the businesses that are doing that style these days are really they're winning, right? And I think Adobe are pretty smart with their standard version now. Like, basically everything in standard you can do in enterprise and vice versa. It's just you get a scaled down version, so it's not like some things where like you cannot do this unless you get enterprise. Usually it's like you just get one, you only have one thread to create PDFs in standard, but if you have enterprise, then you can do multi-thread, which is pretty cool.
And the same with the performance management tool and the securities tools and the API manager. I want to say all of those now you get in with ColdFusion 2021. They all are available in standard, but like you say, they have lower capacities, which is fair enough.
Yeah, that's a good way. You support those people as they come up, and as they get bigger and better and more successful, then then they can pay their share.
I do think we have to mention this database right at the top of the list that has a few users.
I was waiting to see if you'd do that. Yep, Access. That's the first database I ever used.
Well, I thought, no, it wasn't. I used DB2. I think that's the first database I used.
First one with ColdFusion. Let me put it
not this DB2 here made by IBM. I'm talking about the PC database, and I can't remember the name of the company bought it, but I think Borland bought them out.
Yeah, I remember Borland and them. Yeah,
DB2, Fox, is it Clipper and Fox Pro? I think they were all flavors of that same flat file. Anyway, Access. Totally valid if it's not a public site and it's only got a few users. It's like a small departmentally app, but it's not a real database, guys. And SQL Server Express these days, the user interface is almost as easy to use as Access anyway. So
the funny thing is, Access has over 2%, and there aren't too many that have. There's only a few or more. I mean, SQL Server, Redis, Postgres, Oracle, MySQL, MariaDB, MongoDB, but like DynamoDB has less, CouchDB has less, Couchbase has less. So a lot of the database providers are lower than people still using Access. So it's actually one of the leaders. It's still probably like 6th or 7th out of the list.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Very cool on databases. Let's have a look. We're going to look at frameworks and methodologies next, guys. Lots of juicy tools in here that you may or may not be using. Yep. So let me go in and share to that page. So we're going to look at MVC frameworks and CMSs and JavaScript libraries, CSS frameworks, CFC dependency, persistence frameworks, testing, mobile development tools, miscellaneous frameworks, and code reuse. I think those. Yep. And if you feel we need to skip any of these, Gavin, just tell me.
No, it's funny because a lot of them are very similar. A lot of people, like, for example, WordPress. Some people say WordPress is a framework when it's it's a blogging platform, CMS, but people use it as their framework because it's a framework too. And so some of these you see answered vice versa. There's. So it's very interesting for sure. And obviously from Audis, we have quite a few products in here, and our MVC product is ColdBox. And it's kind of nice to see where we have now outgrown the custom homegrown frameworks, which is for the longest time, none or my homegrown framework were the winners for several years. But now ColdBox is ahead of, all of them, miles ahead of, some of the other frameworks. But it's kind of cool to see because, none in previous years is basically almost the winner of every category.
Yeah, it's nice to see that people are recognizing using some framework, whatever it is probably better than not using any. And also that although a homegrown framework can be cool, you can pick from ColdBox or FW1, or I wouldn't pick Fusebox these days because it's just not being maintained. But CF Wheels, those are all maintained frameworks. I think Mark II or Model Glue are no longer maintained, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they're pretty much dead in the water. But again, like Fusebox is similar. There was trying to revive that a while ago, but I mean, really, they do a good job, and they did a good job at the time. But you really wanted to pick something active and supportive, and I mean, even Framework 1, for the longest time, it was way up there with ColdBox, but since Sean Caulfield left, like there's a few other people have stepped up in that community, and they're keeping it alive and stuff, but it doesn't have the same push. But CF Wheels has come a long way. Peter Mary and Tom have come, really done a lot in the last few years to pull it up, and they're doing a lot of great things. So I'm actually surprised it hasn't got a few more people there yet, but they're definitely doing a lot of great things. So yeah, it's good to see some competitive frameworks there, because in the end, if we have strong frameworks, we'll make a stronger language. Because most languages, if you look at things like Ruby and Groovy and stuff, they're not known for their language. People basically, they're not a Ruby developer, they're a Ruby on Rails developer. They're not a Groovy developer, they're a Grails. Most people, they identify by their framework, and most other languages, they do well from strong frameworks. And so it's, that sort of stands out. Like PHP got really popular when WordPress came out and did really well. Those apps, those frameworks, that's what really people grab onto, because they want.
And on the higher end, Drupal is in PHP, I think, right?
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing is, most of those languages have been around the same time as ColdFusion, but they got a really popular framework that, had a bunch of tools that made their lives easier, and developers latched onto them. And so, it's good to see that we've got options, because, not everyone's a ColdBox fan, and that's okay, but there's CF Wheels and Framework 1, and everyone has their pros and cons, but there's definitely a lot of reasons to use a framework, and, don't repeat yourself. And, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Don't reinvent the wheel, I think the thing for people listening, first of all, let me say MVC stands for Model View Controller, for those people listening who didn't know that. That means separate out your code between the logic in the model, the view, all the HTML or other view stuff, and the controller that decides what gets sent where in the app, what bit of logic gets run next, or what piece of display gets run next. And really, in some sense, if you want to be agnostic, it doesn't almost matter which of these you pick, though it does matter, and we could talk briefly about that. But having some way to organize your code so it's easy to find stuff when you come back to the app 6 months later, or someone else is maintaining it, is a big aid. And then my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm messing this up, but ColdBox is what I call a full-featured framework. It has lots of features in it, but maybe it's a bit more complicated to get started on. Framework 1 is really bare bones. It's really just directing things around. And then CF Wheels is kind of analogous, I would say, to Rails under Ruby on Rails, in which it's always, I forget what they could say it, but where you put things they make it so you have to do less coding. Yeah, it's convention over configuration, and that's what ColdBox is too. And so, if you want certain things done a certain way, and to be honest, Framework 1 does this too, with the way that it generates models. Like you put them in the certain folder, like services have a folder, and put it in there, and it'll auto wire things up. But that's the good thing, is like a lot of boilerplate stuff that you would normally do yourself can be done by a framework, and there's usually good reasons for it, and there's design patterns that you may not even know exist that are in play. And, all of them have those benefits. And the funny thing is that those people that say, none, I don't use a code framework, they have a framework that's just their own. They just don't know they're using it, because they have folder structures. They have, I hope they do, because if they just randomly throw code at but usually there's like a naming convention for files, and stuff. There's things you do.
Yeah. I'd say some of the time there is a pseudo framework that may have been followed part of the time. I've come across code where there was no framework whatsoever. It's just a total spaghetti disaster zone. But,
and like I said, there's a lot of frameworks, but the things that really come in ahead and make you really get those nice user experiences is when the framework does things for you that you would have to do yourself. And stuff like, with Rails and everything there, and like CF Wheels, it handles some of the object, like the ORM stuff for you. And so it handles creating objects, and it has your little helpers for you for doing some SQL, and if you want a CFC, you can ask for it. And then the dependency injection framework handles a lot of that. You don't have to worry about making your singletons in the application scope, and then your transients, just live anywhere. A lot of those get done for you. And then like ColdBox, when you use modules, it does a lot of the wiring for you. So if you add a module from ForgeBox, like it'll load the jar files the right way. It'll make sure everything's set up or everything is done for you. And, a lot of people use ColdBox modules in Framework 1. It's just, you have to do a little bit more work to get it to work. There's a few things you have to do that the framework does for you. And that's usually the time people go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize ColdBox was doing all this. It's like, yeah, that's what it does behind the scenes. And so I find those experiences are kind of cool because that's when they realize what it's doing. But yeah, I mean, they're all great frameworks. I mean, and again, there's a lot of experience over the years. I mean, Sean Caulfield's a great developer, and he's did a lot of work to make Framework 1 do what it should do and provide things like routing and, all that type of stuff. And so if you're doing it yourself, you're just not going to have it as polished as a group of professionals out there who are sharing and learning from each other and improving. And so, but it's cool to see that, more and more people are using these frameworks. And like I said, for us, for
Definitely.
ColdBox, like we do a lot of work trying to, get the education out there and build these modules and share it. And so it's kind of cool that we're finally beating those nuns and those homegrowns. So
one other thing I would add from we use ColdBox quite a number of projects, and one of the other benefits is you guys are always adding new things like that Elasticsearch, and I think there's some other cute search that's going to be announced at the Into the Box conference coming up real soon now, whose name escapes me. But the point I wanted to make is when you use a framework like ColdBox, you're exposed to a lot of new technology, modern technologies that you might not even been aware existed, and it kind of makes it easy to use them. So I think that's a hidden benefit of using both ColdBox and CF Wheels for that reason. Framework 1 less so, because it's not quite so active, and also like it's a stripped down framework. It's not not as, whatever the word is, full featured.
Yeah, I mean, it does its core MVC piece, and it's just not diving into some of the other parts, which is fine for most people, So, again, pros and cons, everybody, pick their best. And it's kind of interesting in the others. We see Far Cry there a couple of times, and Cold Spring, and a couple of Fusebox Hybrid, etc. So it's interesting that we see Kendo UI, a JavaScript framework, listed there too.
Well, yes, we have a question on JavaScript frameworks somewhere else, but people don't always read the question before they answer it. So yeah, that's okay. Let's look at content management systems, CMSs. Well, the winner here is don't use one at all. And the second place goes to custom homegrown CMS. So opposite situation to MVC frameworks, but Audis will be happy to see that Gavin in particular, because you're the lead developer on Content Box. That Content Box is the top, whatever you want to call it. I was going to say commercial, but it's open source, so I can't say commercial. But what do you want to call it?
We'll just say it's developed, because it's not a homegrown or a so yeah, it's an open source tool. And speaking of open source, I think Mura in previous years has been the winner, and the reason probably that it dropped is because Mura went commercial, and so they dropped down. They only have 35 people now, and so they're basically right at that 7%, where Content Box is almost 9%. But in the others, there's a lot of people saying Massa, because Massa was one of those that was like the open source fork of Mura. So when Mura went commercial, Massa CMS. Yeah, so we probably want to update that, because I bet there's quite a few there. So if you combine those two, it's that would probably be a representation of what Mura was previously. But yeah, a lot of people have left Mura because of the commercial change, and some of them have come to Content Box. We had a lot of people migrate to Content Box, and then a few people have been, working with the Mira fork, which they called Massa. And so that's something else. So that's probably right up there too. And then, Preside has got a great CMS. They do a lot of work with sort of marketing and sort of clubs. They've sort of got like a niche there. Yeah. So like community type setups. And so, but they've got a great CMS.
There's a lot of features in Preside. I interviewed the president of Pixelate about Preside on the podcast, and they've got all these marketing support features in Preside, and it's got some really cool object-oriented features as well. And then I think we should
nice.
Yeah, we should give a shout out to CommonSpawn and Contents, which are both paid CMSs, and there's nothing wrong with paying for stuff and getting what you need. So we have customers who use CommonSpot for various things. So,
yep, it's definitely it's nice to see, and it's kind of cool. Like for us to have Preside doing so well, as they actually use ColdBox under the hood, but they're a Lucee only deal as well.
Yes.
So they tie into a lot of the Lucee stuff that you can't get in Adobe, and so it's kind of interesting. They do some really cool stuff. So if they have a lot of marketing, and it's very, very specific to their niche. Other people are using it, but yeah, there's a lot of good solutions, and it's kind of nice to have so many in there. So it's not just one. For the longest time, we were really struggling. A lot of the blog CFCs and all those from the older days kind of passed by, and but there's another one that's come up recently. Galaxy Blog is a new one.
Yes.
That, Gregory Alexander's been working on, and I've
we'll
heard lots of updates.
Next time.
Yeah, I've heard
that's
lots of things
new
from
open
him.
source one. Yeah,
so
that's another one to add in. Let's move forward to JavaScript libraries. Very vital part. Pretty much every ColdFusion developer has some JavaScript running, and I'd say 90% of developers use a library of some kind or another. What's the number one library this year, Gavin?
No surprise here. It's still jQuery.
Still jQuery. So free, versatile, low overhead when you use it.
Yep, and I've been using that since way back in CF7 days. So it's been around a long time. It did a lot of stuff that, that ColdFusion helped us with. And over time, with those ColdFusion functions, we migrated to jQuery. And, but it's almost at 50%. So it's kind of nice to see, the next one on the list is the Vue.js. So that one is 16%, which no surprise to me. I think it's the best fit for a ColdFusion developer to pick up a JavaScript library. And then right there, it's pretty close. Angular just pipped React for third spot with 10%, and then React is like 9.9. So very close for those next two. So yeah, so jQuery, the big winner, Vue, the next one, and then React and Angular pretty close. And you've got Backbone and Ember and Kendo. Those are all around the 1%. But Sencha EXTJS is still at 3%. So they're still holding on. So they're hanging in there. And then, of course, quite a few others as well. People using like Moo tools. And Alpine.js has been the next big one coming up. And there's quite a few people talking about that. And there's some HTMXs as well. I read a few things about that, and there's quite a few people mentioning that too. So pretty interesting.
It is very interesting. And I will tell you that I don't think this is so long true, but for many years, we still have the article on the site, 18 tips for jQuery. Oh, yeah. And it was like more popular than our ColdFusion articles. Maybe because of people who use other languages also use jQuery.
Yeah.
But let's go to CSS, because most people use CSS, so some people don't use it at all. What's the top CSS library this year?
This year, it's Bootstrap again. It's still holding strong.
Why is that?
I guess it came out and it was just the most popular one, and it did so many things well. It did all the minification, and it did all the zeroing out of all those crazy things that your browsers would do. So it really helped people across browsers. So I think that's the big winner. It looked good. It looked professional. And that just really, it was like jQuery. It did all the things for all the different browsers, and it's pretty
compact too. It doesn't add a lot of bloat, I don't think, even now.
It's pretty good. I mean, and they've kept updating it too. Like, the Bootstrap 5 is out, I think. So 3, 4, and 5 are pretty popular for, for quite some time. And so a lot of people are using it. And
I want to say the R word at this point, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Responsive.
Yeah,
it makes it easy to make a responsive site. And that's one of the reasons we use Bootstrap.
Yep. And I think too, like they really did good with getting out themes and templates and customizing it after it came out. Because that was the first thing, is every site looked like Bootstrap for a while, and everybody was like, this is ridiculous. But I think they've just got so much theme support now. Like some people use none. There's like 13% using none. But the next one's really, like Tailwind's probably the next real one there at 8%. And you've got Foundation at 4 and Beautify at 3, and 68% or 69% basically is Bootstrap. So it's miles ahead. I mean, it's 7 times more people are using Bootstrap than Tailwind. That's kind of crazy, because Tailwind's really taken off. It's really good, but Foundation I thought was pretty strong. So kind of,
and there's a few other ones. Bulma is probably the biggest write-in option people put in.
Yeah,
but even that's still.
Yeah. Because I mean, Bulma has 5 or 6 write-ins, and like that would basically be right about 1%. So so that was the other. There was like 3% other, and then 1% of the total was Bulma. So yeah, it's amazing. And if you're not using CSS, maybe this year is a good time to pick up a little CSS. Yep, I love Tailwind.
Yeah. To make your apps look more modern and be responsive, so they work on tablets and desktop and mobile without having to change the code, and all kinds of other good reasons.
Yep.
Let's move forward to CFC, dependency injection. And some people are probably asking, what the heck's that? Because I see the most popular answer is no, you don't use anything.
Yeah.
So why would someone want to use dependency injection? What's that all about?
So, I mean, it really comes down to, in the old school days, people would just say, hey, invoke a new CFC, and then they'd get a CFC, they'd use it, and then it would disappear. And over time, we started making more and more complicated CFCs, right? And that's where things get trickier. And they always go back to the composition thing, like, hey, if you want a car CFC, you need an engine, you need tires, the engine needs spark plugs. And so if you start to do some crazy object-oriented code, and your CFC, like your user service, needs, it needs basically your security service, but your security service needs your user service. So what you'd normally do is you'd create a user service, and then you'd pass it to the function that creates a security service so they could use it. Or inside your security service, you would make a user service. Inside your user service, you'd make a security service. And now you have this loop. And so dependency injection just says, hey, I want a security service and I want a user service. Can you make this for me and get them to me? And the cool thing about that is that you don't have to worry about what a security service needs when you're writing your code to get it. You're just like, hey, give me a security service. And something like Wirebox or DI1 or ColdSpring says, okay, you need a security service. Security service, what do you need? And it says, I needed this, I need this, I need that. And it goes and gets those. And then it basically figures it out. And the cool thing is if you only need one security service for your entire app, it'll store it somewhere like the application scope. So you share it. So you don't have to keep creating them over and over and over again. And so that's where dependency injection gets really, really powerful, is that, it's storing the right objects the right way. So you don't rebuild objects. You don't need to rebuild. You don't need to worry about like how to build them. Did I already build one on this request? Should I go look and see if there's one hiding in the request scope? Doesn't matter. You just say, hey, like I use Wirebox with Order Solutions, and you don't have to use ColdBox to use Wirebox, but you just say, hey, Wirebox, I want to use a service. And it says, sure. And inside that, if the user service needs to have a logging service and it needs, Sentry service, you can do bug logging, whatever. You don't have to like build all that out and then give it to the user service. And, you just say, Wirebox, I want to use a service. And it says, here you go. And that's all you need to worry about. So it's version of control, like you ask for what you want and it'll figure out the rest.
Yeah, it abstracts out all that dependency stuff, so you don't even have to worry about it. And if it changes in the future, if there's a new version of that object that now has extra dependencies, it deals with that without you having to change your code. And it avoids some errors if you get the dependency stuff wrong, if you were coding it by hand. it avoids all that kind of bugs that can be quite subtle to work out. So
yeah, I mean, you can't use like a lot of the tools that we build. We couldn't do it. Like Command Box uses Wirebox because Command Box, the CLI, needs that type of stuff. I mean, just something like if you want to use Quick uses a bunch of different things, and they all like some of it needs, if you're using bcrypt, you need the jar file. And so Wirebox will get the jar file loaded the right way for you. Like it'll handle all those things. So you don't have to worry about it. And if you install that module does the work to get it ready for Wirebox. So you don't have to do it. And that's one thing with Framework 1. If you install like bcrypt into Framework 1, you have to figure out where the jar is and how to load it and how, have to set all that up. But with Wirebox, the way it works with ColdBox, it knows what to do, figures it out. It's just there. So,
and all of these frameworks for dependency injection are all open source, is my understanding. So, they're all good. I think ColdSpring. I'm not sure ColdSpring's being actively developed.
No, that's a very old one. And actually, Luis just built a tool to help convert. He wrote a blog post too to be able to convert ColdSpring over to Wirebox, because we've had quite a few clients that have been running that forever, and we're like, you need to get upgraded. And they're like, well, can you help us? Like, sure. So Luis is like, well, I better publish that so everybody else can, win. And so ColdSpring, there's still 6% of people using ColdSpring, but 46% of people don't use any framework. And like the rest of custom homegrown ones, about 12%.
Yeah, there's no point in building your own of this at this point, I don't feel.
Yeah. So
and to be fair, some of these people may not be using a lot of objects in their code. Others may be, and they're just not aware this would save them time. So
yeah, I mean, I had code in my application CFC would say, hey, do I already have a user service in my application CFC? If I don't, put one in there. And I have all this code basically checking to see if I had it and if I needed it, how to build it. That's what I used to do. And so I put Wirebox in as one of the first things I did in the old legacy app was put Wirebox in. And so there's 26% of people using Wirebox, 8% are using DI1, which is Framework 1's one. So those are the two modern ones. And obviously the rest are ColdSpring. And I think there's, I've never heard of Pavine, but
yeah, I don't know. It was only one right-in answer. Let us proceed to the persistence frameworks. And what is a persistence framework? Because most people don't seem to use them.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, it's a way to help you store your data somewhere. You want to store it persistently. You want to store it in the database. And these frameworks help you do that. And so, most people would probably be familiar with like an ORM, an object relational mapper. And so you've got, Hibernate, which is built into Adobe and Lucee. Those are probably the most familiar ones. But there's also, some different ones like Preside has Preside objects, and there's Far Cry Core has its own little ORM, and CF Wheels has its ORM built in. And then Quick, which is a ColdBox module, is written in CFML, and it's basically made to store in the database without using, queries. And so just an easy way to map your objects to your database and make your life easier. You don't have to spend all your time writing CRUD queries over and over and over again, because you've written the same query probably a million times, right? So these will help your life, and they'll make it easy to load data, retrieve data, search for data, and just, they'll really help you with all that. And ColdBox's CRM, CBRM module is a little helper library that lives on top of Hibernate for ColdFusion and Lucee. And so that gives you a lot more helper methods to make it even better. So it's a pretty good group here. So obviously none at 249. A lot of people love writing SQL, right?
I think a lot of people do love writing SQL, and there's nothing wrong with writing SQL or stored procedures if you're using SQL Server or whatever the equivalent is in your database flavor du jour. But not for doing, inserts, deletes, updates,
Yeah.
It's
just boilerplate. I mean, one of the biggest reasons I like, Quick is probably my favorite out of all of these, but ORM is good too. It just reduces the amount of boilerplate code you have, which means you've got less code to, try to figure out when you're debugging later. It's less legacy code to maintain. It's easy to look at it and just know what it's doing. And for me, that's a big win, right? Just maintainability.
Yeah, it makes it more maintainable. It abstracts out. So if something changes in the database, you don't have to change it all through your code. It's just in that one.
And that is the key, because
module.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they change versions of databases or change databases completely, that's probably the biggest thing that I didn't mention, is that you can change from SQL Server to MySQL just by changing the language for ORM, and most of your code will just transfer. Not many people do change databases. Let's just put that out there. But if you needed to, you could. And the cool thing is, locally, you could have MySQL running, and you could deploy to MySQL SQL Server or something else, and the ORM will translate that for you, which is neat. Although I don't recommend having a different database locally than on the production server, because that will bite you.
Yes, don't want to do that. Keep the as equal as you can. Yeah. Same environment, same as staging server. So I mean, we do use ORM in some of our apps, but I will say if the queries get complicated and you've got multiple tables and all kinds of wacky stuff, sometimes it's easier just to write some SQL.
No, and I highly recommend that if you're doing something more than CRUD or very simple searches or like filters, then you should definitely be doing it in SQL. There's no thing that says if you're using ORM you cannot write SQL. And I think a lot of people think that and they freak out and like, nope.
Yes.
Because ORM, trying to do reporting in ORM is not fun, because it generates objects, and generating objects in ColdFusion sadly is not as fast as it should be. They are pretty optimized for that, but yeah, there's a lot of things you can do in SQL that are better, and so definitely don't hold that back, But it's kind of nice to see that ORM is 11%. The ColdBox CBRM module is about 7 or 8%. Quick has gone up to almost 7 or 8% too. So as many people using Quick as the ORM module for ColdBox on top of normal Hibernate. So that's kind of neat. But
it is amazing. Let us move on to testing and mocking frameworks. Why would I even want for all those people who answered none to this question? What's the benefit? What's this testing and mocking stuff all these other people are doing?
So yeah, I mean, we talked about migrating versions, and if you don't have any tests, then that gets a lot tougher. And so, for the longest time, testing was one of those things where most people said half the people in ColdFusion aren't testing and the other half are lying about it. So everybody just clicks around their apps and think they have to do manual testing. But this year,
not more. Not now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing stuff like Cypress and Selenium, and these non-ColdFusion ones are showing up in this list, which is neat. Because for the longest time, it was MXUnit back in the old days where people would use, and then we forked MXUnit when everybody basically stopped supporting that, and we made TestBox, and that's got way more than anything else here except for none, because there are a lot of people that are not testing.
And I just want to point out to people, a lot of these products end in the word box. You don't have to use ColdBox to use TestBox, guys. And the same for Wirebox and CommandBox. I'd say the majority of box products are totally independent of each other or ColdBox. So,
exactly. So, but there are a couple of other options in here. So if you're using CF Wheels, Rocket Unit is built in. So there's 13 people are using that. But it's kind of nice to see Selenium is actually after TestBox. Selenium is the most used testing framework, and then Cypress is just a couple more spots back, which is another end-to-end sort of testing framework that a lot of people are using.
Well, if I understand it correctly, TestBox is where you add TestBox calls in your code that test that the functions are working right, or the overall functionality of the whole app is working right. There, I think we call them assertions in computer science or something like that. Whereas my understanding of Selenium, it's kind of like you're pretending to be a user running the app, and it kind of runs the app through its paces.
Kind of, but even in Selenium, you're like, I'm going to go to the login page. I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to assert that I see this text showing up on this page. Or I'm going to, put my mouse over this button, and I'm going to assert there's a drop down pop up. And so it's sort of like you're actually in a browser clicking around to do stuff, but it's still at the end of the day, you're basically you've got this plan in your head of if I do this, this should happen. And test box is code saying, if I run this function and I give it these 2 arguments, I should get this back. Or if I hit this URL in my browser with ColdBox and I do these few things, it should try to redirect me to this page because I'm not logged in. And so they're basically getting better and better at those types of things. And Selenium is one of those things you can do manually, and it creates a script for you to rerun. And Cypress is really cool. There's so many cool testing tools out there, but I mean, right now, 26% of people are using TestBox, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
And then 10% Selenium, and then
what I'd say to people, I mean, there's kind of a spectrum of how much testing do you do on the app. At the hardcore end, test-driven development, you actually write the test before you write the code. That's why it's called test-driven development, or behavior-driven development is a slightly different flavor at a higher level. At the other end, you just the bits of your app that were buggy, write some tests for them when you were fixing those bugs, so that you can test the bugs really are fixed and no other bugs come back in that bit. And as you go, slowly expand the amount of code that has tests in it, or use cases that you've written tests for. So, don't feel it's an all or nothing thing. You can add a bit of testing into the bits that need it more, and add more over time. And I think it's pretty rare that I just to be fair, on an enterprise size app, first of all, there probably isn't automated testing for everything. And secondly, not all the code even gets exercised when the app is run.
Yep. And that's why the Fusion Reactor plugin that we built with TestBox now, if you have a license, you can actually do code coverage when you do your test, and it'll tell you, are you covering 33% of your code? Did it go up? Did it go down? Did you actually, add some tests? And some of our continuous integration, we actually show those numbers. And so we could see, ooh, Gavin just committed some code and his code coverage went down 8%. It looks like he didn't add any tests, so, but yeah, it's kind of nice to see sort of those types of things.
And that's where Brad's Raspberry Pi display thing puts a red light next to Gavin's name, No, just kidding.
I've thought about that. But yeah,
Yes.
there's the reports and everything you can do from that. But yeah, it's good. And like I said, for tests, you can just, I think if everyone just basically wrote a test for every CFC they had and said, can I create this CFC without it blowing up? Their lives would be 100 times better, because that times that you fat fingered a typo in your function name or whatever, just that alone would save people a lot of headaches. And so in some of my testing webinars and presentations I've done, that's how you get started. You write a test for each of your CFCs. Can I invoke the CFC without it blowing up in my face? Because if you can do that, that's a big part of your app probably. If every CFC can compile, that's a big part of the app's failing a lot of times. So, and just that alone will give you some, ability to sleep at night.
I'm all for less stress in development,
Yeah.
When I did a survey asking about health issues people have, like backache, neck ache, what are that's wrist thing people get. Carpal tunnel, yeah. And a lot of developers have all those things, but the number one thing they listed was stress. And, I'm all for let's get rid of the stress. Let's get rid of the health issues that developers have, and be healthy, happy developers. So final question for this episode. And we're going to come back to the other questions in the survey in another episode of this. Mobile development frameworks.
Yeah. And this is something that's changed over time. For the longest time, the native Android and native iOS was a lot higher in previous years. So now we're down to basically 4% and 5%. And actually, Ionic is higher, Flutter is higher, Cordova is right at 4.9% as well. Progressive Web Apps is, probably the leader there. But even things like PhoneGap, which is the same as Cordova, is basically Cordova's the open source version of PhoneGap, which kind of got killed off. That's at 3.3%. And then React Native, 4%. And then Quasar, which is what I love using, it actually outputs to Cordova and Capacitor. And those are, Vue apps. And so basically, it looks like almost 80% of the people that are doing apps now are not doing native, which is really cool. For the longest time, Apple, their iOS apps, they basically punished you if you used a web view in there. They purposely slowed down web views inside of an app to the point where it was severely limiting. And so now it's kind of cool that they've got to the point where you can choose Chrome or something else inside your apps, and you don't notice the same as before. Because several years ago, if you had a non-native app, you could tell. You just didn't have the performance. You didn't have it. And it's great to see now. So half people aren't doing mobile dev, but the half that are, 80% of them are doing, basically some version of, a sort of transpiled web view styled app.
Yeah, because all those other libraries basically compile into the native one, or they're doing other tricks. That means you can write it once and it runs in Android or iOS.
Yep, exactly. And some of them do, like you say, like React Native and Flutter, they'll actually like compile down to a native Android or a native iOS. But a lot of them like Cordova and Capacitor, they're just doing web views, but the web views are faster. So it's nice.
Yeah, that is nice. And also it's not really listed here. I mean, we've got progressive web apps, and I know the app you guys have for your Into the Box conference, I think that's a progressive web app. Yep. And so that's doing a responsive web view, plus it's stored, if this connectivity goes away, it still runs.
Yeah, manifest files and offline storage and stuff.
But what I want to say is a fair number of people these days are running a responsive, browser version of the app, and it runs in the phone just fine. And you can save it to the desktop of the phone. So let's wrap up this episode. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, Rooney, for those who are watching on our YouTube channel on video. Hopefully those who are listening on iTunes or any of the other podcast platforms were able to follow along with our play-by-play audio description of what we were looking at. But if people want to find you online, Gavin, what are the best ways to do that?
On Twitter, at @GPickin. So it's like you're picking something up off the ground, but the G's on the front, not the back. That's the best way to find me, but I'm always on autosolutions.com. I'm blogging. We're doing presentations. The Modernize or Die podcast is every week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and I'm usually a host there, but that has a lot of information too. I'll be Into the Box. I'll be at CF Summit. I'm speaking at both of those conferences too. So, plenty of places to find me, and I'm noisy. So you'll hear me talking about something. And like I said, we'll come back and like maybe after Into the Box before CF Summit, we can do the next set of questions and work our way towards the end of the year. Like I said, I'd really like to go back and sort of see the trends. It'd be pretty cool to see, some of them, like how the JavaScript frameworks have died over time and come through, and the engines have been upgraded or not. So I think that'll be pretty cool. But again, thank you for doing the survey. We love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show and picking apart, so to speak. That's a pun for those not picking it up. The results, and I hope your presentations at Into the Box and CF Summit go great. For those of you who haven't already signed up for Into the Box or CF Summit, please go sign up for them. Support your local ColdFusion conference in Houston, Texas, or Las Vegas, Nevada. Yep. Or if you're unable to travel for whatever reason, sign up for CF Casts, which has lots of great workshops on ColdFusion. Or there are lots of YouTube channels, TerraTech YouTube channel, Adobe one, the Altus one. There might even be some other YouTube channels that have a lot of ColdFusion content on. So look forward to seeing you in a month or so's time, Gavin, and see everyone else next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode in your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is teratech.com. Viva la CF Alive Revolution!